Thank you, Åsa, and thank you to each and every one of you that are here this morning. I think some of you are joining us for the second time around because this is the second open forum discussion that we have. If you are, we are happy to see you again. If you're here the first time, we are even more happy to see you because I think this is a discussion that is very, very important, not only for the steel industry, but for the full value chain in our industry. But before I go forward, let me just thank Åsa and the staff of worldsteel that have worked very, very hard to get us to this point. The first issue was to get an hotel. We wanted initially to have this in Brussels, but all the hotels were taken for this time of the year, and eventually this is where we end up. It's, in earlier days, I always came through Antwerp on the way from Brussels to Rotterdam. That's in the days when I was still in mergers and acquisitions, and we had to come and speak to the Commission all the time about new companies that we were buying. And the train always stopped here, waiting for some other train to get out of the way or to do something. But anyway, we sat here for about 5 minutes on the station, and the only thing I knew about Antwerp was the skyline. And it's now 20 years later, and for the first time I'm below the skyline and seeing it on ground level, and it's not so bad, actually. Thank you also for bringing us here. Also to the AV team, we've been working together for a number of times now, but thank you for all your attention to detail and making sure that it works. Nowadays, with meetings with people in the room and others joining by video and others joining on a virtual link and making sure that everybody can hear each other is quite a technological undertaking. And I'm very happy they are doing it and we are not doing it. So thank you so much for your hard work. And then, as I've said, to all of you here, thank you for being here. For us in the steel industry, this whole question of decarbonization is a critical question. It's important for the future of our industry. I think if I make the statement that compared to a mere 2 or 3 years ago, the attitude in our industry has completely changed. This is now the focus point in the steel industry. Steel industry executives know that decarbonization has to be done. We know that our industry have credible solutions to this challenge, and we know that it will take lots of investment, lots of time, lots of retraining, and lots of new thinking in years ahead to do this. But it is possible to do, and we're all convinced that it is possible to do. And therefore, in our industry, I think the focus is on moving forward in this path of decarbonization. What is quite clear also, this is not a challenge that the steel industry can tackle alone. We need the support of other industries around us. Most important about those are, amongst others, the energy industry, the raw material industry, because decarbonization will have changes in our industry that will also spill across the boundaries of our industry and force change in other industries. And therefore, this discussion is designed not only as a discussion of steelmakers amongst themselves. It's designed really to discuss outside the boundaries of the steel industry and find out how the changes that we need to make influences other industries and how the changes in those industries have an influence back in our industry so that we can find a common and harmonious path going forward. It is important to maintain, I believe, the steel industry as a basis of economic activity in modern society. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. It is important to also know that if you look at some of the documents that McKinsey have made as a contribution to the latest G20 meetings that took place in India recently, they made mention of change at 3 levels on the route to decarbonization. First level is the change at what they call the physical infrastructure level. This means how companies are operating, how societies are operating. The second level is at the society level and the level of economic adjustments that need to take place. Typically what we are talking about today. How does the economic adjustment in the steel industry require changes in society? And then lastly, changes at the governance level and institutional level. Equally important for our discussions today. So really the discussions today and tomorrow are looking at layers of change from physical to economic to governance levels. And we need to understand these changes to work through in a credible way on the way to transform the steel industry. Important, in my view, to maintain is the central character of steel as an industry. Even today, steel is a very global industry. We're global not only in terms of the size and the scope of our activity, but we're also global in terms of how much of steel moves between regions and continents. It's today lower than during the days of globalization, but still today, 1 out of every 3 tons regularly changes between continents, not even between countries, but between continents. If we talk about products containing steel, like vehicles and washing machines and other parts of machinery, the figure is even higher. 40% of all steel-containing products are crossing continental boundaries. So we're an industry that really needs openness, needs the common word, a level playing field. And whatever we design on the way to decarbonization must therefore be equitable and, in my view, must maintain this open and freely flowing character of steel as a material and steel as a product. And why? Why is that? Because I believe steel as an industry is an enabler in economic systems. In 2018, we've asked Oxford Economics to do an evaluation for us in the 10 largest steel producing and steel using countries around the world, and then take the rest of the world as a single grouping, and figure out what is the impact of a good steel industry in those economies. And what we found was that in 2018 terms, roughly about $3 trillion of value was created in the steel industry value chain. The interesting bit is that of the 3 trillion, only 500 billion was created in the steel industry itself. The rest was equally split between the upstream and the downstream parts. About 1.2 trillion in the part of the parts of the industry that supports the steel industry, supplying products and services to the steel industry, and about 1.2 trillion in the parts that are using steel as a product. So steel really played the central role as guiding economic activity up and down an economic system. We found the same thing also when you looked at employment. About 95 million jobs, 96 million jobs to be precise, created and maintained in the steel industry value chain, excuse me, but of those, only 6 million jobs in the steel industry itself, with about 40 million jobs in the industry supporting the steel industry, and about 50 million jobs in the industries using steel as an industry. The steel is a product. And therefore, it is important, I think, for society as a whole, to recognize the central economic enabling character of the steel industry and make sure that we maintain it and protect it on our way to decarbonize. We must also know that steel already, in my view, is a very competitive product when we look at CO2 emissions on a unit per unit basis. Compared to most of our competitor materials that we encounter in all the ways where steel is used, and I don't really want to call them competitor materials, they are really collaborating materials because steel never operates alone. Steel always works in collaboration with something else. We don't like to see steel, so we clad it in timber. We need steel to maintain concrete structures. We need steel in various other ways, and it always works with something else. But even so, compared to all these other materials that we work with, on a CO2 basis, steel already is very competitive. But we also know that the industry of steel contributes in the order of 8% of all CO2 emissions that society makes on a regular basis. And just that size forces us as an industry to do something about decarbonization. So we cannot sit and say we are the most CO2 competitive of large materials. We have to move forward and become even more competitive. And in doing that, I think we will ensure that steel has a long-term future in society. Today, each one of us, as we sit here, is responsible for using, in the word, 220 kilograms of steel per person in the world. So each one of us, theoretically, consumes 220 kilograms. That's for the pipeworks that bring the water into your house, the electricity systems that put power in your house, the car that you were driving, the floor that we are sitting on, and so on and so forth. In some countries, it's much higher. In South Korea, it's regularly more than 1,000 kilograms per person. In China today, it's more than 500 kilograms per person. In India, it's 76, and in South Africa, it's 76. So vast differences in how much steel is being used, but all of us require steel on a regular basis, and we depend for our life on steel as a basic material in society. So let's work together, find solutions on decarbonization, and make this industry even better than it is. In 2016, as an industry, we decided to contract the International Energy Agency just to do a pathway evaluation for us. Really, the question was, what can we as an industry do on the way to decarbonization? We didn't call it decarbonization in those days. We wanted to know how far can we go in reducing CO2 emissions. The IEA did a study jointly with the input of worldsteel members, of associations around the world, and eventually published the study in 2020. And it was clear from this evaluation that a lot can be done in the industry. Actually, it became quite clear that already at that stage, and I think that conviction is firmed up even now, our industry has sight of the technologies that we require to decarbonize into the future. Not all of those technologies are precisely available at the moment, but we know what to do. The challenge is to scale some of these technologies away from the experimental stage into the commercial stage, but we're also fairly sure that it can be done. And the IEA essentially said that there are three kind of steps in this pathway towards decarbonization. Step one, in the early years, is to try and use the existing technologies that we have as efficiently as possible. Step two is to grab the benefit that we as an industry have in terms of using recycled material. We call it scrap, but it's really recycled steel. But that's not sufficient to supply everybody with the amount of steel that they want. And that leads us to step three, slightly more into the longer term, to continue to work on research and development programs that will help us to make blast furnaces more efficient as a first step, and eventually potentially replace blast furnaces with something else in the longer term. But three very clear waves of activity. And we're right in the middle of the first wave. worldsteel is a program called Step Up, where members are getting the benefit of best practice approaches around the world. And we can see very clearly on individual member levels that are participating in these programs that there are improvements that we can see. These improvements are still too small that we see a reduction in the average on a global level, but we can see already the movement beginning to take place at company level. At the same time, we are seeing growing investment levels. Just in the EU alone, I think something close to 5 billion euros have already been voted for investment that will go to decarbonization. And I see similar figures in other parts of the world. So there are things happening. The results are not yet visible, but the movement is taking place. And therefore, the question is, why should we then have this discussion if so many things are beginning to happen? Is there not enough momentum already? My answer is no. What is actually taking place is that the debate is shifting. Till quite recently, the debate was, can we do something? That is past. We know we can do something. We know what to do. We have a clear idea of what technologies we require. But the debate is now shifting to say, well, firstly, how do we make sure that this is happening successfully and efficiently? Secondly, how do we make sure that we use common harmonized approaches to measure emissions, to make sure that we share the benefits in some equitable way? Because there are benefits, and it's becoming clear that there are benefits in decarbonized materials. But let's now focus a little bit on finding common rules of the new game. And that's a big part of the new debate that I see coming forward. We need to focus in finding these harmonized approaches, because we have very well-meaning advice coming from a large number of participants in our industry. Åsa and her colleagues, Claire and the others, are talking to virtually all of these, and they tell me that they don't have enough time to talk to all of them, and everybody thinks their idea is the best, which is correct. Otherwise, why would you do the research? And many of them are very good ideas. The question is finding the common elements of these and making sure that we as an industry do not break ourselves apart to try and satisfy all demands. We have to focus our focus in terms of where we need to go and find, therefore, common approaches. And that's our responsibility, to take all these good advice and change it into something that will work for all of us and that will be an efficient process of change. And this discussion is really about highlighting where are the areas of harmonization that we need to focus on in the short term. That's why we deliberately limited the role of steelmakers in this discussion to no more than 1/3 of the total. And the other 2/3 were given to participants from outside of the steel industry, so that we can get the storylines, get the requests coming from outside of the steel industry. Do not worry, we have made for all our steelmakers the facility available so that they can join us virtually. So they are also participating, but not in an interactive way as you do. And to all of those of our members on the video link, I welcome you as well. I realize Antwerpen time is not the best time in the world for everybody, but thank you if you are staying up late or if you have got up early to join this discussion. And as also said, you can ask your questions, just send it in by email, q at worldsteel.org. So questions, send it to q@worldsteel.org for any of the panel discussions. At any stage, we will pick it up and bring it into the debate. So finally, what is the purpose of this open forum discussion? Initially, about 3 years ago, we had a discussion with our senior members. And at that stage, they really wanted to develop a joint research and development program on a number of key questions in the path to decarbonization. Legal advice at that stage said, well, you know, you can do it, but be careful about antitrust, be careful about this, that, and the other. And eventually the decision was not to go forward with a joint R&D program, but rather to develop something like this, an open forum for discussion so that we can share what happens in the industry, but also get the inputs from elsewhere. The good news is that the EU has very recently changed their competitions law to allow under limited conditions for the carve-out of R&D programs specifically focused on decarbonization. And we are investigating that possibility. It may very well be that in the very near future we can actually agree to do a joint research and development program in our industry. But this forum is not for discussion of technology development. If you want to, then please join us in December in Abu Dhabi for a technology conference, which has the similar principles, is what are the changes that we need to do technologically, and what can be done in the short term and in the longer term, where we can move forward as an industry. And if you are interested, speak to my colleague Rizwan, who's arranging that one. Rizwan, where are you? Stand up so they can see you. So speak to Rizwan, Abu Dhabi, December, what is it, 4 and 5? 5 to 7. So early in December, make yourself ready for Abu Dhabi. Till then, please join us in today's open discussions. Share your views openly and share also your questions, because eventually We will only go forward if we are critical with what we design, critical on whether what we want to do is the best under the circumstance and is the most efficient under the circumstance. But I once again thank you all for taking the trouble to get here. I thank you in advance for your views, your contributions, and I say once again thank you to Åsa and her team for arranging this and making this a success. So thank you for being here. It is then my pleasure to also now invite our chairman of worldsteel, Mr. Choi, who is the chairman of POSCO Holdings in South Korea. He cannot join us physically, unfortunately, but he has sent us a video contribution, and I asked the guys to now play the video of Mr. Choi. Oh, I have to do it. I have to move forward. Eh? So,
ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to deliver this keynote by greeting all of you. Although I cannot be with you in Antwerp, I am delighted that we have organized this second open forum. The steel industry has a monumental challenge to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. While we are confident that it can be done, we need to move mountains by preparing massive funds, engage in serious research and development, and investing time. Given this enormous global task, World Steel is exploring joint R&D programs to develop new technologies. This open forum encourages steel industry partners to identify joint solutions to be applied across the supply chain and the broader ecosystem. I strongly believe the steel is indispensable and critical to our society. The steel industry adds value to other industries in the global economy and create countless jobs. Additionally, steel is competitive against other materials when measured on CO2 emission per unit of production. Nevertheless, the production of steel remains a carbon and energy-intensive activity. Without a doubt, climate change is the most serious challenge we face today. Therefore, while it is crucial for the steel industry to remain in operation, we must significantly reduce carbon footprint. Hence, we must transition to sustainable steel making. Not too long ago, the steel industry was perceived as rusty, old, dirty, and smoky. Today, there is a growing understanding of the significance of steel and its role in transitioning to a decarbonized long-term future of humanity. As climate change is a global task, the challenge is greater than the sum of the steel industry. Whether it is related to technology, necessary infrastructure, low carbon input, or financing options, we must pool our collective wisdom to identify solutions. World Steel is ideally positioned to engage global steelmakers and the stakeholders in conversations on this crucial topic. The open forum aims to serve that purpose. So we would like to engage all of you in discuss about climate change in the steel industry ecosystem. I urge you to share development and challenges in new technologies and discuss policy approaches with the spirit of openness. More and more steel makers are pledging net zero commitment and racing ahead to development technologies. Many of our members have announced programs and investment plans to help us collectively enjoy low-carbon products and their applications. As previously mentioned, the process will take time, ingenuity, and massive investment. But the efforts are already underway in multiple locations around the world. While this open forum will focus primarily on policy, raw materials, and energy availability, a similar open event is scheduled to focus on technology evolution. The Breakthrough Technology Conference will be held in December in Abu Dhabi. I look forward to your participation there too. In closing, I would like to thank everyone for your willingness to spend time to discuss this critical topic. I am especially grateful that the entire industry value chain is represented at this event. I look forward to informative and constructive discussions over the next 2 days and wish you success in your deliberations. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to deliver this keynote by greeting all of you.
The wonders of technology nowadays. Finally, just 2 small remarks. While we believe we are going to be successful, we also believe there's a lot of work to be done. And for that reason, I'm very happy specifically to see so many of our national and regional association colleagues, because this debate is not a world steel debate going forward. It's a global debate. It's a global challenge. It will require a global approach to find a solution, and therefore we need to find ways to harmonize whatever we do into a successful process going forward. Secondly, we know, again, because we believe we are successful or going to be successful, that not everybody else will believe this. And I now ask my colleague Bradley to share some of the results with you in terms of a recent review that we've done about views on the steel industry, and specifically about whether people believe we are doing a good job or not. And Bradley, if you can come and share your results with us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. And let me first of all echo Åsa's, Edwin's, and indeed Mr. Choi's sentiments in welcoming everyone to Antwerp and those of us who are joining online. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm particularly thankful to Åsa for giving me the opportunity to share with you what I think at least, is quite an impressive, significant piece of work that we concluded earlier in the year in April, and which we presented to the Executive Committee and the Board of World Steel then. It is a piece of research that we do at intervals of every 4 or 5 years, let's say, in collaboration with Ipsos, which I'm sure many of you will be aware is a significant global market research and polling organization. And what we're doing with them is that we are trying to get an understanding of the perceptions that are out there about the steel industry. We're asking people in countries all around the world, we're asking different target audiences, and we're asking them two things, really. We're focusing on perceptions of steel as a material, that is to say, its inherent qualities. Do you know how many times you see it in your everyday life, for instance? What's its environmental footprint? Is it easy to make, etc., etc.? And then we're also talking about the industry itself, with respect to, is it a good employer? Is it a safe and healthy place to work? Is it on the cusp of developing a lot of innovative breakthrough technologies, etc., etc.? And the reason why I think it's particularly important that I share the results of that research here at the Open Forum is that you can probably guess, with respect to climate change, the results coming back are not good. I mentioned that we do it every 4 or 5 years. Indeed, the last time we did it was in 2018. And since then, we saw then, I should say, an increasing awareness that that steel was very important in terms of its contributions to climate change compared to other industries. And that seems to be increasing rapidly. It's now, without a doubt, the biggest single threat to the steel industries and steel as a product's reputation out there. So, before I show you the results of that survey, a few finer points on the methodology. So we're carrying out the research in the top 10 steel-producing countries, generally speaking. That changes over time. Compared to last time, for instance, Italy dropped out of the top 10. We couldn't, for legal reasons, sadly, carry out the research in either Russia or Iran this time around. Iran has moved into the top 10 spot now. So what we did was include for the first time a grouping of Southeast Asian countries. I'm sure many of you will be aware the developments and increases in capacity and production in Vietnam, especially, and others in that part of the world. So it was interesting to see their view for the first time in this iteration of the research. And what we're doing is in each of those markets or countries, we're carrying out what Ipsos call computer-aided telephone interviews that take between 30 and 40 minutes, in which we're asking people, generally speaking, in response to a statement, to give their impression on a scale of -5 to 5. Now, Ipsos tell me that if you do that, rather than give people a scale of 1 to 10, they're less shy about being negative. And so we can get a better impression of what they really think, which is an interesting detail, I think. And we are, in terms of the people that we are interviewing there's a breakdown of customers, suppliers, we're asking the media, and we're asking increasingly a community of investors and people, as many of you are doing, working for ESG organizations, NGOs, etc. We also have, in addition to, in this iteration, the 9 countries or groupings of countries, every time we carry out the research, what we call the global or international grouping, let's say. That is for people working in international, supranational organizations, the International Labour Organization, the UN, the OECD, etc., etc. So to move to one of the many ways that we can compile the results that we get. Normally, when I show this slide, colleagues from JSW and Tata, I know that we have some in the room at the moment, smile, indeed, congratulations, take a pat, give yourselves a pat on the back, relax, whatever you're doing in India, you're doing a fantastic job. And indeed, what we've got here is a correlation. The first kind of questions that we ask people in the interview is to what extent they feel familiar with the steel industry and to what extent they also feel favorable about it. I mentioned already that in this time around, India's enjoying its position in the top right-hand corner there. That is somewhere where it has been since we started carrying out the research. The first time was about 20 years ago, I think. broadly speaking, I think you can still come to the sympathetic conclusion that there's quite a strong correlation between how people feel, the extent they feel familiar with the steel industry and the extent that they feel favorable towards it, which is good news for us. That correlation is breaking down. It was stronger last time around. And indeed, if we go to the next slide, what I've put up here is the positions that we saw in 2022 and the positions that we saw last time in 2018. So again, if we look at the right-hand side there, India's gone up, in fact, in terms of its favorability, which is good news. There are some other more concerning trends. I should mention, actually, that last time we carried out the research, there was that very strong correlation, but there were two quite interesting outliers. The first one was the US, which in a way was in a very great position in that people said they didn't feel particularly familiar with the steel industry, but were very favorably inclined towards it anyway, which is great. Conversely, what we had in China in 2018, if you look towards the bottom right there, you'll see that people felt they were quite familiar with the steel industry and didn't like it very much. When we look at, for instance, the favorability of the USA this time around, we see a statistically significant decline. That is also mirrored precipitously in Germany. We can more or less say that that's applicable to Western Europe as well. I mentioned last time Italy was in the top 10 countries and was included in the research. Both of those countries were almost exactly the same. We also had a significant decline in Brazil this time around in terms of favorability towards the steel industry. And as we'll see later on, all of the respondents say that the main reason for that is the association with steel's contribution to climate change. In Brazil, there was also a specific issue around safety and health. That's perhaps for another event. But nevertheless, climate change was still the #1 factor contributing to a negative impression of the industry. And now to carry on with some of the specific data with respect to steel as a material specifically, I should mention that despite this declining trend in the reputation of steel, nevertheless, it remains at the top compared to other industrial materials. So it's more favorably regarded than aluminium and concrete, I think, is particularly interesting to see, and the other materials that we see listed on that slide there. So that's good news. All our collaborators, as we can describe them, seem to be in a similar position to us. As I mentioned, nevertheless, a decline in every single country, with the exception of India. There's a very slight increase in India in the number of people saying they feel unfavorable towards it, but nevertheless, India's position remains very strong. And now, in terms of the audiences that are responding most negatively, it's not the customers, it's not the suppliers, it's in fact the journalists, and it's the ESG, NGO, IGO community. So, compared to the customers, compared to the suppliers, a smaller audience, certainly, but probably in terms of general, almost certainly, in terms of general public perception, much more vocal, a much more conspicuous audience with a lot easier access to disseminating their negative opinions. So, something for us to think about at World Steel, I think. And I've included here just a comment from one of the interviewees, which is a general, generally applicable to all of them. As we mentioned, CO2, the energy requirements and the CO2 impact of that, all contributing to this negative impression that that audience in particular seems to be holding. When we ask people about the qualities that steel as a material itself has, it's quite good to see its durability, that it lasts a long time. I am personally quite disappointed that more qualities related to sustainability, like the ability to recycle steel infinitely, is not higher up. Here again, the reasons given for the negative opinion of steel as a material overwhelmingly related to its environmental footprint. Here we see again steel compared to some of the other materials about which we ask questions. That it's strong and durable, fantastic. That production of it increases climate change. We see it's almost neck and neck with the plastics industry. That perhaps is fair. What is surprising to me there is that especially compared to concrete, which contributes a similar amount of carbon emissions, steel is so much more negatively perceived. So I don't know what it is exactly what the cement and concrete industry have done to give this impression. That is easy to recycle. Good to see that steel is coming up at number 1 there, but with only 57% of respondents, including customers and suppliers, and informed people in the media and ESG environment, I think that's surprisingly low, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do there to increase the perception that, increase the fact that steel is easy to recycle 100% and infinitely so. That is everywhere in your life and down significantly compared to the last iteration of the research is also quite disappointing. I also was disappointed with the second to last chart that we see there, in which we see that steel is not seen as modern, innovative, perhaps as Chairman Choi alluded to, this perception of it being rusty, old-fashioned, is still persisting despite all the work that we're all putting into countering that. With respect to the industry as a whole, the news is better, I think. So as I mentioned, the material is number 1, the industry is number 1 compared to the competitor or collaborator industries. That's very encouraging. It's better known, but nevertheless, that trend which I alluded to earlier of a negative perception creeping in over time is becoming quite significant, something that we need to do to counter that. As I mentioned, we have specific problems in the USA, it would appear, in Germany and in Brazil. Now, we've, of course, been in contact since this research was published with the especially national and regional associations in those countries. The reasons why that might be, there are specific ones, of course, and those national and regional associations are working on it. But I should probably mention at this point that in an upcoming meeting of the Communications Committee that's taking place next month, we will be making the final decision on a proposal to update the key messages that we have at worldsteel on our website, in our publications, on our social media campaigns, exactly, that will target specifically those negative impressions that we've identified, in particular in those countries, which will also be to the benefit of everybody else, we think, whose reputation has not declined to such an extent. The data here for the ESG community, they are polarized, in fact. We have some people aware that the steel industry is doing a lot of work in developing methodologies, in investing in breakthrough technologies, etc. I'm sure that those people who view those things negatively are still aware of it, but feel that not enough is being done with not enough urgency to merit a favorable, very favorable, or even a neutral response to the steel industry in this case. So, there's a lot of work to do, I think. It's interesting. I hope that this will inform, to an extent, the discussions that we'll have over the coming days. And I think I can leave it there, unless there are any questions that I can take before handing back over to Åsa to continuing the opening session. Perhaps not. The Indians are relaxing. Everybody else. Yes, thank you.
Does it work? Okay, good. I was wondering, in your countries, slide, you had other countries. I mean, I come from Sweden, and you know that in Sweden we are doing quite effort for decarbonization of the steel. And I wonder if in countries where the steel industry is much more committed with the decarbonization, we are actually shifting this perception of steel being something, bad and not good. Because, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but in Sweden, everyone is looking at the steel quite hopefully, like, well, this is something that we could contribute and, yeah.
I would hope so. After we published this in April, as I said, some national and regional associations take the methodology and they carry out the same research in the countries in which they operate, which weren't covered in the World Steel Association. That's particularly true in Latin America. I don't think it's the case that the Swedish Steel Association is conducting any research like this at the moment. They're aware of it and are members of the Communications Committee. I'm sure there it would be the case that, unlike what we see in Germany, there's perhaps a more positive view. Sweden, I think, in terms of production, is number 25th in the world, something like that. Even if we have a 100% very favorable reaction there, it won't be enough to counter the negative perceptions that we see elsewhere.
I mean, as a way to change the perception, right? As soon as maybe, it could be like a check. Is it actually in Sweden even? We know that Sweden is a small country. Our contribution to the total, it's what it is. But is it a way to kind of change the perception, kind of having, let's say, the US companies much more committed to this and showing actually that this is something that we could do? Maybe, in 2-3 years when projects start to realize.
Sure.
That was more rather than the impact of Sweden in the overall, that not at all.
I think, yes, I think I see what you mean. So that what they're doing in Sweden, if indeed the perception there is quite positive, could act as a blueprint for other places. I think perhaps, obviously, every country has specific is operating in specific circumstances. Sweden is blessed with a lot of water energy, with a lot of access to renewables, etc., etc. So that blueprint might not work everywhere, but it's indeed something I can look into with the Swedish Steel Association and see how they're getting on. Thank you.
Bradley, this.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Sundaramam from Tata Steel.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So when you mentioned unfavorable perception or opinion, the way Mr. Edwin has mentioned, steel industry per se, and the enabling industries of steel, and the consumer industry or user industry. So can we break this into those three parts? Which part is more unfavorable? Because generally steel is connected with raw materials, coal and iron, and they are seen as the polluting industries as well. Yeah. So maybe if we do second level, then we may get more ideas and more what is the exact perception about steel industry.
Yes, indeed. I can mention that actually for the benefit of the World Steel members, on our member-only extranet, we have a much more detailed presentation that goes into a much greater breakdown for all of the countries. There's a global one and an individual one for each of the countries that we conducted the reputation in. So you can see it there, indeed.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to share the link. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. No, I mean, once we compare steel with other material, I mean, you compare two bars, there are two ways of working. One is you improve your performance, create a better perception. The other one is to expose others also. So,
Yes.
but let's not get into the negative part.
Yes.
But for the purpose of improving ourselves, we must study that what differently they are doing. Like you rightly said, concrete, though they produce more CO2 per ton or per ton of concrete, whatever is the measurement. How they are able to create a better perception?
Indeed. We don't, as a general rule, go after, so to speak, the weaknesses of our collaborator materials. We wouldn't call them that, I think, if we did. But the Concrete and Cement Association is a guest at the upcoming COMCO meeting to describe exactly that, in fact. They are quite advanced, I think. They have some impressive association-wide agreements in their roadmaps that they're producing. So they've got a lot of very hard policy papers and other things that they can share. They're doing good work in general, communications to the public, etc. There's a lot we can learn from them, and we will, and we are. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. It's very good to hear about the reputations and everything going on in the steel industry at this point. So I'll start with Fadil. I'm from the Emirates Steel Arkan, from the Arab Emirates. I actually would like to comment. While you're explaining over here some things about the reputation and so on, and in the beginning we described that there are 3 things we can do, whether it's scrap, whether it's, let's say, carbon capture, alternative fuels, etc. Now, for me, for example, scrap is a little bit on the difficult side, especially that I'm still a new country, so it's difficult for me to import, or my, let's say, prices will be really high, or my production cost will increase big time. Now, carbon capture, we're one of the only companies right now in the world to actually have this carbon capture, and still it's not seen as a good thing to these in the world, decarbonization world, because of the enhanced oil recovery purposes. Now, this is also something we need to solve. So the most important thing I see, in my opinion, right now to enhance all the companies' reputations is right now just to go to hydrogen. Why? Because, like the director was saying, we have 3 different steps. You have the upstream, the downstream, and then actual steel production and the upstream. If you produce hydrogen, you'll be fixing the downstream because you'll actually be procuring. You'll fix your own product, and then you will have a good downstream for companies which will buy from you. But now the thing is, I am ready to put hydrogen and so on and so forth for the reputation purposes. I don't know if you guys will be able to answer this, or maybe it will be discussed later on. But how can I make a possible commercial sense of this for me, just to get the reputational let's say, advantage in it? So the only way for me to get the reputation or to improve my reputation is by introducing hydrogen. But now there is no actual off-takers. It's true that there is maybe BMW or something with ArcelorMittal have already did some off-takes with, but that's a small amount of steel, which is only maybe flats or something like that. What will happen to the longs, maybe? So like construction steel, rebar, coils, how is it going to be looked upon within the industry? What should we do actually to make it look more reputable if we cannot do anything other than hydrogen at this point? Because hydrogen won't come before 10 years, let's say. It's 5, 6, 7, 10 years. What to do in the meantime right now?
It's a good question. In our policy paper on the production of steel at climate change, as I think Edwin alluded to just before I came up on stage, we're stressing not only the development of breakthrough technologies, of which hydrogen is only one. We have electrolysis of iron ore, etc. We have many things. We're also stressing that there's a lot the steel industry can do right now to improve its carbon footprint. We mentioned the Step Up program that we have. This is focusing on making operational improvements with currently existing technologies to bring many World Steel members up to a level that the best performing sites are working at. So there's a lot of different pathways that we can take. We're stressing all of them at World Steel. We're collecting examples of how people are taking different paths in the different countries or regulatory frameworks in which they're operating. And we're making a concerted effort to stress that there is this option, there are these options, this heterogeneity for the steel industry to take to improve its reputation, of which hydrogen is only one. So I think, I hope that answers your question.
Actually, for example, I agree with you. There's many types of technologies right now. Electrolysis for now is even a little bit, even at the far side from hydrogen, for example. All of these things you're talking about is correct. Because even the step-up program, I think we're also engaged somehow in it. But the thing is, no matter what the technology is, there will always be some capex and, let's say, increased opex for us.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm trying to say is, going back to what I was explaining, is how can I make these capex and opex, for example, more competitive for me in a sense where I'll be putting, let's say, some sort of commercial advantage for me. Because right now, I can't see a market, at least in that region. So what can I do for myself, for example, to actually adopt these at this point? Because like you said, the technologies are there, we just need to scale them. The technology was there when we had the carbon capture, and we scaled it at Emergency. We were the first in the world to actually adopt it. So I'm ready as a steel industry in the UAE to do it. But I need here some insights about how to create the commerciality behind it a little bit more sensible and, let's say, make it look good, at least for me, in a commercial perspective, of course.
Okay. I don't have the answer now, I'm afraid. If I did, I didn't think we'd need to be here. But I think something specifically in terms of this kind of issue and steel's reputation, I think something that we need to do better at World Steel, where I think we're quite good at talking about the general recyclability of this, scrap use here, is bring up to the forefront, in particular because of this negative impression amongst journalists in the ESG community, the technical work that we're doing in developing methodologies, in collecting data around, we have, for instance, a list of, I think it's 17 eco-profiles that we're producing on an annual basis for 17 steel products, hot roll coil, wires, etc., giving, I think, quite an impressive level of detail on a global basis of, first of all, what the facts are and the environmental footprint of making those. And once the methodologies are aligned, once the data is out there, which is something I can see that we need to do better at World Steel, I think, we can make specific targeted plans for the different areas in which our members are operating, I think. Thank you. I think I need to wrap it up there. I see short, one last question. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Excellent. First of all, Paul Brooks, now these days with Beckhardt. I know some of you from when I used to be in the steel industry. A question of clarification. I think one of your slides actually showed, although steel is a reduced favorability, quite significant, I think all sectors had a reduced favorability.
Indeed. Yeah.
So I think there's also a general trend out there which is anti-industry. So I think it's more general than just steel. That's my point I wanted to make, really.
You're completely correct. That's right, yeah. We can take some succor, I think, from the fact that we're still number one compared to all the other materials that have seen a decline in their reputation, indeed. All right then, so at that point, thank you for the interest. I'm around and we'll be happy to take the additional questions that we didn't have time for during the breaks or lunchtime. Let me invite Åsa back up to the stage to conclude the opening session. Thank you again.
Well, I always worry that we won't have enough to talk about and that we will finish, very quickly. But I think that's clear that that's not the case. Before or at the last part of this session, I also have a presentation to make about what we do at World Steel. And some of these things have already been mentioned, but I'll go through it and see maybe I can add some details. Climate action at World Steel. First, to just remind everyone, I think everyone's aware of the scale of the challenge that we're talking about. So on this graph, you have the evolution of steel production since 1950, and it's very clear that there has been a dramatic increase in the last 20 years. We have more than doubled production globally. At the same time, we are emitting about 1.9 tons of CO2 per every ton of steel, which means that we are of course very responsible for a large part of the global emissions. We typically talk about 7 to 9%, and the reason why we have a span is that it depends a little bit on how you kind of cut the boundaries around these calculations. But it is clear that we need to focus on this topic and change this picture. So what can we do? It's already been mentioned again, but this is just to show you on a graph the three main levers that we see. So the underlying graph here shows the top line is the demand increase that can be is expected to increase up to 2050. Of course, exactly how much, no one knows, right? There are lots of different projections on this, but it's still expected to increase. I think that's the main point to make here. While, of course, our emissions need to go down significantly, both as an industry as a whole, but also per ton of steel. We believe that we have three main levers to do this. The first one is efficiency. Quite a lot can be done, actually, with the technologies that we already have, and I'll come back to that. The second one is scrap availability. As you will know, scrap is, of course, the availability of scrap is a function of previous production. The average lifetime of steel products today is around 40 years. So if you remember the graph on the previous slide, that dramatic increase in the last 20 years, that scrap will start coming back over the coming decades and will increase. However, as we've already heard, it won't solve our issues totally, in particular because we still have a demand increase going forward. So we definitely need breakthrough technologies, and again, we've heard that there are lots of things going on. We'll come back to those things, of course, more in detail going forward. It will take some time, of course, to roll this out globally, and the situation and the conditions for the various technologies is quite different in different parts of the world. So there is also now massive interest in the steel industry transition, and we tend to put up this slide. It's not aiming to be complete. We keep revising it all the time. We're adding new things to it, but it's sort of just showing a bit of the types of organizations and initiatives that take a real interest in the steel industry transition. And as Edwin was mentioning, we're trying to engage as much as we can with all of these different initiatives, and they all provide very good or useful discussions and insights and suggestions for the transition going forward. In general, I must say that we find that it's a constructive conversations in all these. We heard that the reputation wasn't that great. I must say at the same time there is a real recognition that the world needs steel. We can't do without steel for development purposes, of course, infrastructure and all of that, but also for the transition itself, for renewable energy and so on. There's also recognition that it's not so easy to decarbonize in the sense that we can't just switch fuels. But we need more of an in-depth transition in terms of the technologies that we use and the raw materials and all of that, so it's not completely straightforward. And then all these different organizations are rather having that sort of as a starting point and thinking, how can we help, how can we encourage, how can we sort of help the industry move faster and further. So if we look at the discussion, so in the debates, we see now, has also been mentioned already today, that we sort of know what we need to do, and it's focusing. The debate is shifting from making these long-term commitments of being carbon neutral in 2050 to actually looking at what do we need to do more in concrete terms. There is also an increased interest from all these different organizations to harmonize and actually work together to see that we can avoid all these how can I say, this division in terms of how we are going to reach there or how we are going to measure what is actually the end point. In terms of definition, which was a very hot topic at the Open Forum last year, I think there is also a growing recognition that in terms of what we mean when we talk about near zero steel or low carbon steel or green steel, there's an endless variation of that name, that in fact one definition is probably not a solution because we have different circumstances around the world, the definitions are being used for different purposes, and we're likely to need a sort of a set of definitions. At the same time, we need to make sure that that you can understand, that you can somehow relate these definitions to each other, and a basic for all of that is that we have common ways of measuring and common ways of reporting or collecting data with boundaries and so on, so that we know what we're really talking about. A few observations from all of these discussions is that we feel, and actually it links sort of to this reputation point, there is a real need for the industry to engage, to involve, to talk about what we are doing, the specificities of the industry itself. For example, the scrap discussion is of course something that comes up from time to time, but why don't you just use scrap? And though we would like to, of course, there are all these other reasons for the situation that it is today. And we need to engage and make sure that the discussions is sort of based in facts and the real circumstances. We can also still see that a lot of these initiatives are in fact still based in the EU and in North America. And if we all know that the main bulk of steel production today is happening in Asia, and we need to make sure that we get an involvement of all the steel actors around the world to actually make sure that we have a global transition. Quite often the representation from steel companies is much broader than from governments, for example. It's of course absolutely crucial to engage with developing and emerging economies. We also see the discussion becoming even broader. So Edwin was mentioning trade before, and the WTO, for example, has recently taken an interest in all of this as well. So we are seeing that it's moving, how can I say, the debate, the discussion is getting broader and broader. So just to mention a few principles that we think are absolutely crucial for global action or for these different activities. And it's that it's global applicable. I mentioned that before. We need to make sure that we have an inclusive approach, that everyone can benefit from the discussion, but also can apply whatever the solutions that come out of those. From the steel industry perspective, it's extremely important to be technology neutral. We heard about hydrogen before. It's a very important new technologies. We don't think that that's going to be the only solution. We have a number of breakthrough technologies being developed, and we need to make sure that they all, could be viable options depending on the local circumstances. We heard about the collaborative materials. Here I mentioned intermaterial competition. That's another way of phrasing it, of course, but we need to make sure there too that we have a level playing field between the different materials, that not one is considered favorable against others. And again, the sound methodologies and data sources. So how do we contribute as World Steel? Well, we are, of course, providing industry expertise. We try to communicate and discuss with as many people involved in these discussions as we can. We are very set on providing a global view. Where we can, we provide data, of course, only public data and such that are mandated by our members. We are able to act as a convener of the discussion or to make sure that we disseminate the information to the global steel industry, for example, by organizing webinars and so on. From time to time, we also do reasonability checks or of assumptions, of models, of these things based on, of course, our own, the studies that we do. But what else do we do as specific activities? Because this was more related to the outside, what's happening, let's say, outside of the industry. So I realize you cannot read anything on this slide. This picture is, of course, available on our website as well, where you can look into it in more detail. But we have tried to organize the activities that we have in worldsteel in relation to the different sustainable development goals. And oops, wrong. I was going to point. No, it's too bright. You can't see it. Anyway, in the top there you have goals number 7 and 13. So these are related to energy and climate. So that lists the different initiatives that we have there. But as you see here, worldsteel scope is much, much broader, of course, than climate. I mentioned a little bit before, we do around safety and training and economics and statistics and all of those things. But going more into the climate-related activities. So we heard about Step Up before. Step Up is our program related to efficiency measures. So this is, of course, before we have breakthrough technologies that can make a real sort of step change, we need to do what we can with what we have today. And we have a number of benchmarking programs within worldsteel that shows that the best performers in terms of, for example, reliability and energy efficiency and so are also the best performers when it comes to the CO2 emissions. So based on that, we have created this program called Step Up. It was started in 2019, and it's to maximize the efficiency of the existing technologies and practices that we have in place today, so without actually installing new technologies, for example. We are using 4 levers for this. It's raw material quality, energy efficiency, process yield, and process reliability. And we have a benchmarking system for each of those where members can provide data, and we can use those then to share good practices. So the Step Up program is based on reviews of companies. Companies can volunteer to be part of it. They then go through a review and are assessed against the best performers in the industry and get suggestions for how they can improve their performance. And we've carried out about 25 reviews in more than 10 countries at this time. We also have a CO2 data collection system, and most of you will have heard of this most likely. We established the methodology in 2000, we did the first data collection in 2008 based on 2007 data. This is an internal data collection for our members. We only publish, in fact, the global average numbers for it. It is, when we collect the data on a site-by-site basis, we then group them depending on the process routes. So here you have the big box there, the blast furnace BOF route, or the integrated route. The yellow one is a scrap-based EAF. The orange one is DRI EAF, and then we have others, which is those more complicated sites that tend to have a little bit of everything and are not so easily classified. And our colleagues in World Stainless, they also collect data for the stainless facilities. So the numbers I will show you now is from the data collection last year. So this is based on, let me think back then, 2021 data. Then we had contributions from 65 integrated sites, 111 scrap-based sites, and 15 DRI EAF sites. So this in total covered about 25% of global steel production. And the average numbers for the different routes you can see here at the bottom. So for the integrated routes, the average of the data that we have, which we believe is a very good sample, is about 2.3 tons of CO2 per ton of steel. The variation is, of course, relatively large in this group. The scrap-based EAF is 0.67, and the DRI EAF is 1.65. So what do we do then? We use this data from these 3 different routes. We multiply it with their share of global production, and we produce a global number. And this number last year was 1.91 tons of CO2. And for those of you who have followed this data collection, these numbers, you will see that this number has actually gone up a little bit it's not a big change, but it's sort of going up a little bit, which of course is quite frustrating for us to see, where we're hoping that it will go down. But the main reason for this is the demand increase and the increased and that the scrap availability is not following the demand increase. So the share of blast furnaces or integrated sites is still growing, and that's the reason, the main reason, I should say. All right, so the CO2 data collection number is then going into a set of performance indicators that we have on sustainability. So that's another thing, that's the top line here, but we also collect a number of indicators every year, and you can find this on our website. Just wanted to show you quickly. Another big program that we have at World Steel since a long time, not specifically focusing on climate, but incorporating climate aspects, of course, is a life cycle assessment. So this is a data system based on a World Steel methodology that we began already in 1995. So it's been around for quite some time, and it's very well established, both, of course, within the industry, but also as a real good and credible, very useful source for life cycle practitioners around the world. Also here we collect data on a site-by-site level from World Steel members. We have about 150 steelmaking sites at this time, so it's also a very good coverage. We generate data, sort of average data, that we then share for about, 17 steel products right now. And anyone, so these data are open, anyone can ask for the data, but you have to fill in a form on our website, and we'll send it to you. And this is because we would like to know where these data are being used, but it's not restricted in that sense. Of course, life cycle assessment covers all environmental aspects, all raw materials use, energy, and all emissions to air, water, and waste, etc., but also including climate. Also was mentioned, I think Bradley mentioned this before, from this data we are producing something we call eco-profiles for all these products, but also where we can on a regional level. So here you have 3 examples, also from 3 different regions, Asia and Europe and the global. And these profiles you can find on our website just to download directly. It's basically a more sort of user-friendly way to show our data results from that study. All right, so coming to the open forum, I was afraid, as I said, that I would have a lot of time to fill in this session, but I realized we only have 5 minutes left, so let's try to do this a little bit quick. I think we heard a lot about the open forum, the reasons why we are doing this, and so on. We had the first event, I should say, last year. It was in October. That time it was slightly smaller, about 100 people, 50 from the steel industry and 50 external organizations. We organized the event also in sessions, similar program to what we have today. That time we started with discussing roadmaps, because there are lots of roadmaps out there on how the transition might look like. Then we had presentations from our members about what they are doing concretely in their companies. We discussed around measuring and tracking of the transition. We also talked about raw materials and energy requirements, and we'll come back to that in this open forum, partly because, of course, it's such an important and large topic that we wanted to continue those discussions. The last session last year was related to how customers and finance are shaping the market for low-carbon steel, so focusing more on the demand for low-carbon steel products. We had very good engagement in the discussions. I'm really hoping we'll have that this year. I think Bradley's presentation showed that people here are not shy to ask questions, so I would really encourage you to keep up with that. Just a few things to highlight from the discussions last year, which sort of makes the foundation for this year's discussion, is that we sort of know now, or at least there is a general agreement, that it is possible to reach net zero. It's technically and economically possible, but would require a lot of work, technologies, some of which are not available yet, but also that we really need to act quickly. So the 2020s, we really need to start seeing a change in emissions already now, because that's essential for the total carbon budget. We also know that the transition will look not the same everywhere, but it will depend on local circumstances. It will have enormous resource implications, both for energy use and so on, but also for the types of iron ore that we are using, for example. And that we need to work together. We need to form alliances and to really work with our suppliers, with our customers, with governments, of course, with research institutions, financial institutions, and so on. We cannot do this alone. It is really a team effort. So to just my final slide, I wanted to draw your attention to our website. We've recently reorganized it a little bit now. There's a very clear section called Climate Action. If you open that web page, it shows you exactly these 9 boxes for different themes. And if you click on them, you then go to dedicated pages focusing on that. Here we have our policy paper on climate, of course. We have fact sheets related to different technologies and raw materials, for example. We also try to collect as much information we can about member initiatives. So when you all, steelmakers in the room, when you put out your press releases and so on, they are likely to feature also in this list on our website. And we do similar things with external initiatives to try to show what is going on, not just in the steel industry itself, but in the whole ecosystem. And I believe that was my last slide. I hope that means you got we have some kind of basis for the discussion now, and you're aware of the activities and so on that we have here. If there are any immediate questions, I'm happy to take them. Okay, there is one question over there. Please introduce yourselves with a name and organization as well, so everyone knows who's speaking.
Sure. Is the mic on? Yeah, great. Eric van Dusen from ING. I think, Åsa, you said that you don't believe, as worldsteel, that one definition of green steel is required, and I would like to challenge you on that, because I think that's wrong. And I think there are 2 reasons for that. I think the first reason is that if you don't have one definition, you kind of get, a children's football competition where everyone gets a medal, right? Like, oh great, I can be green according to your own standards. And not only is that, fundamentally wrong, but it also makes it difficult for investors like myself to not understand, so what are the real green investments that are being made? And I think that's really an issue that's out there. Secondly, what I think is that obviously steel is, it's a difficult industry to invest in. It's a conservative industry to a certain extent. And what the industry also needs is kind of 1 or 2 companies that really show the way and say, this is an ambitious green definition, and we can actually adhere to that, and we can create a market for that, and we can show that it can be done. To create, this catalyst to show that others that they can make these investments, that they can make these change. And I think that if you're supporting, different shades of green, or allowing everyone to have their own version of what is green, that will not happen, and that will slow down the progress that we need.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for those comments. As we know, I think everyone here, that this is a difficult and quite controversial topic. Let me just clarify. I think that there will be needed, or at least the way my thinking goes now, is that we probably need a set of definitions for different specific purposes. Also, it might be possible to agree on the end point, as in where do we need to go in the final, as in what is near zero or zero, or I don't know exactly what the term is. But it's also quite clear that the world will move in different pace. So there might be need for a different, different sets of definitions in different places along the way to that final endpoint. Anyway, I'm sure definitions will come up again, but we like to try to focus on what we believe is the fundamental before you get to the definitions, which is the common measurement standards and boundary conditions and so on, which is of course necessary. We need to know that we're measuring the same way if we want to apply those data to comply with definitions. So I'll leave it there. I see that we just reached the time now. I'm going to break for coffee. As I mentioned before, the coffee is just outside here, or there's an additional room, I forgot the name, it's just sort of around the corner. There is some more space over there. We have a half an hour coffee break. We meet again in this room at 11 for the next session on policy implementation. Thanks.